All right. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're calling in from. My name is Ann Cleveland. I am the Executive Director of the Center for Long-Term Cybersecurity here at UC Berkeley. And I'm very proud today to be launching with our partners at the CyberPeace Institute and with the generous support of Craig Newmark Philanthropies, the Cyber Resilience Core Roadmap. The Center for Long-Term Cybersecurity at UC Berkeley exists to amplify the upside of the digital revolution and help decision makers take action today on the cybersecurity problems and opportunities that face us. We also work to expand who participates in cybersecurity. The work you're about to hear about is emblematic of that charge. Our agenda this morning will be for the next 25 minutes. We're going to have a presentation of the Cyber Resilience Core roadmap and platform with an opportunity for audience Q&A at the end of that section. And then at the bottom of the hour, at the 30-minute mark, we'll invite a distinguished panel to share some insights from cyber volunteering on the ground in our communities and have some additional Q&A. So for the audience, please feel free to put your questions in the Q&A button in the Zoom interface as we go, and we will take your questions again at the bottom of the hour and again after the panel. So thank you all again for being here. We're really excited about this, and it's my pleasure to introduce Sarah Pawazek and Grace Mena to present the Cyber Resilience Core Roadmap.
Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. We're so excited to be here to launch this report. It's truly been a Herculean effort across dozens and dozens of experts, and I don't think we could be more excited to share with you today the findings from the report and where we think it'll take us in cybersecurity. So my name is Sarah Pawazek. I'm the Program Director of Public Interest Cybersecurity at UC Berkeley Center for Long-Term Cybersecurity.
Good morning or good afternoon, everyone. My name is Grace Mena, and I'm a Public Interest Cybersecurity Fellow at the UC Berkeley Center for Long-Term Cybersecurity.
So a little bit about the Cyber Resilience Core. We're over 30 experts across cybersecurity, from cyber volunteering leaders to academics to MSPs, consultants, and industry leaders that have all gathered together over the course of the last 6+ months with the mission of uniting and strengthening volunteer efforts to deliver real hands-on cybersecurity support where it's needed most. So I'm going to talk a little bit about things that you probably already know, which is that the status quo for small community organizations is completely unsustainable. Organizations that are providing critical, essential public services are often the least prepared to handle cybersecurity threats. And regardless of whether you call these organizations under the cyber poverty line or target rich resource poor, we all know that they refer to organizations like nonprofits, hospitals, utilities, and other small critical organizations that just don't have the resources to prepare themselves for cybersecurity attacks. Building on that, community organizations cannot afford cybersecurity, and they lack the in-house expertise to implement safeguards. We go into this in great detail in the report with a lot of facts and figures, so I encourage you to read that, but I won't belabor the point because I think many folks in this industry are very familiar with this problem. Lastly, cyber attacks ultimately hurt our nation's most vulnerable populations the most, especially people living in poverty or in rural areas who don't have the resources to make up for those services that might go down. For example, if a hospital in a rural area were to be hit with a cyber attack and have to close, if someone had a serious health emergency, they'd need the ability to drive and take time off of work for a much greater distance. And so ultimately, we're talking about trying to build in protections for folks that have nowhere else to go.
So when we started convening this group, we wanted to first understand what currently exists in the ecosystem to help community organizations. And the good news is that over the last 15 years, new service-oriented cyber volunteering programs have been established across the US to help address the vulnerability of organizations operating below the cyber poverty line. Most of these organizations are comprised of volunteers who offer pro bono services in their free time or for non-monetary incentives like school credit. And other service providers exist in this ecosystem as well that provide low cost or significantly below market cybersecurity resources and services. But it's still not enough. But right now we're seeing that 50 unique volunteering groups exist across the US that are comprised of about 3,900 volunteers, and they help around 500 community organizations per year. And while these groups are a major step forward, these solutions are not enough. We identified in our research significant and critical gaps in the existing system and concluded that these volunteering programs collectively are not coordinated enough, not mature enough, or widespread enough to help solve the problem on their own. Without coordinated action, we're not going to be able to help support the scale of community organizations that we really want to. Right now, at least 22 states do not have any regional or local volunteering groups, including university clinics or state cyber civilian corps. And those that do right now face significant hurdles to scaling their impact. And so our work is not done.
We're here to convince you today that we can't accept the risks of not taking coordinated action on this issue. This is not a new problem that community organizations tend to fall through the cracks of cybersecurity, especially when we take a national security lens versus a community security lens. But we don't believe that we can put off any longer taking coordinated action to try and help these institutions protect themselves. So with that, we're excited to share the roadmap to community cyber defense that we've developed in coordination with the Cyber Resilience Corps, a group of over 30 experts. This is a coordinated strategy to defend community organizations by providing strategic recommendations in the short term to help plug gaps and interventions that we can make in the long term to make this system of cybersecurity more sustainable and more accessible to very low resource organizations that we don't believe will scale up to be able to adapt. We do this with 4 major steps that we'll go through at a high level today. One is proposing a co-responsibility model for sharing responsibility between individual organizations and cybersecurity experts. The second is an on-ramp that proposes short-term recommendations for how cyber volunteering can help plug some of the gaps and scale enough to help a much broader swath of organizations in the United States. The third is our destination, which is a world in which community organizations can thrive without needing to be cyber experts 100% of the time. And lastly, we provide a state guidebook as states are taking on more and more cybersecurity responsibility. We provide very actionable tools, case studies, and model laws for them to be able to implement a holistic ecosystem of support across many different sectors and institutions. So let's dive in. Before we begin, we thought it was really important to talk through what small organizations should and should not be reasonably held responsible for in cybersecurity. Currently, they're responsible for everything: risk management, cybersecurity knowledge, resourcing, and implementation. And the group, for the most part, agreed that community organizations should be responsible for some things regarding cybersecurity. They should be responsible for understanding the risk that cybersecurity poses to their organization, whether or not it's a nonprofit or a business, and they should seek to advocate for solutions to those risks internally, like they do with many other risks, including legal and physical. They should not have to be responsible for being cybersecurity experts or hiring in-house cybersecurity experts, which is the current expectation. We focus very much on what do we think is going to be feasible for small organizations with their budget and with their staffing levels, and what do we need to do to plug those gaps.
And that brings us to our on-ramp, which is essentially a series of recommendations to address the immediate ecosystem needs. And the goal of these recommendations is to create a short-term safety net for community organizations. So our first subset of short-term recommendations is to mature cyber volunteering. Why is this important? Because community organizations across the country deserve a consistent, high level of service, regardless of where they're located or which volunteer group they connect with. Right now, many of the more established volunteering groups and programs have developed best practices and learned valuable lessons over time. These insights can be incredibly beneficial and helpful to newer, lesser developed programs. So to mature these programs, we recommend expanding the collection of metrics on volunteering groups' impact. This will help us understand what's working best and where improvements can be best made. 2, clarifying liability protections for cyber volunteering. This is really important to ensure that volunteers feel secure in providing their valuable services. And 3, improving volunteer and client matching. Connecting the right volunteers with the right organizations will maximize both efficiency and impact. Our second subset of short-term recommendations is to expand cyber volunteering programs. As mentioned earlier in this presentation, right now volunteering programs are really localized, and we want to scale those service offerings and capacity to help more people. To effectively expand cyber volunteering, we recommend that existing cyber volunteering programs prioritize the most threatened organizations. We need to direct our resources where they're most urgently needed. We also recommend continued investment in the interconnectivity among existing volunteer programs, which we hope will foster collaboration and ensure a more unified front. And third, we recommend continued financial investments in cyber volunteering programs. Sustainable funding is essential for both growth and long-term impact. And our third and final set of on-ramp recommendations is to enhance the continuity of service after volunteering. We see this piece of the puzzle as absolutely critical to effectively bringing community organizations above the cyber poverty line for good. It's not enough to just provide a one-time fix. We need to empower them for the long term. So to do this, we recommend a few things. Number 1, to centralize key template resources. Providing easy access to standardized tools and documents will help streamline processes and improve outcomes. We also recommend bolstering handoff procedures after engagements, ensuring a smooth transition once volunteer work is completed, which is vital for sustained security. And finally, we recommend helping organizations find full-time support. Our ultimate goal here is to equip these organizations to stand up on their own 2 feet after engagements are finished.
This brings us to our destination. We believe that cyber volunteering is a really critical piece of the puzzle, but we don't believe that we're ever going to have the scale of cyber volunteering to be able to help every organization in need in perpetuity, which is why we propose a number of strategic interventions that we as a country can make over the next several years to try and make the ecosystem easier and shift the burden away from individual organizations. The first way we propose doing that is that companies must simplify cybersecurity for non-experts. The staffing and knowledge burdens on community organizations are too high, and we have to alleviate these burdens by making cybersecurity accessible to non-experts. The federal government plays a key role in simplifying cybersecurity, such as CISA continuing its Secure by Design initiative and its Secure by Default work. And this is very much in line with the National Cybersecurity Strategy, which the US government should continue to shape and enforce software liability laws to hold companies accountable. The private sector plays an outsized role here. They're able to voluntarily comply with Secure by Design and Secure by Default, and also continue to innovate by developing usable technology and offering affordable IT services. Finally, venture capital investors should continue to invest in developing low-cost cybersecurity products that automate essential cybersecurity actions and can be managed by non-experts. Next, we recommend that states should create shared services for community organizations. Community organizations simply do not have enough on-hand support and lack resources for professional services. This is where states can provide a critical service by pooling a number of critical services that otherwise small organizations would either be unable to afford or unable to take on the procurement burden. State services at the state level could allow community organizations to gain access to critical services at a discount or at cost while avoiding these procurement and legal reviews. It would also fill a market gap and create customers out of previously unserved organizations. These services should not start with products, but with critical services like managed IT and cybersecurity services, risk assessments and implementation, and security operations center abilities. It's also essential that the federal government continue to fund existing shared services for public infrastructure that MS-ISAC and CISA give out, including free monitoring, penetration testing, threat intelligence, and other federally subsidized services. And lastly, we must continue embedding cyber knowledge in our communities. We don't believe that cybersecurity experts will be able to solve this problem by ourselves. We need to go to regional and state community leaders in other sectors and help them understand the basic cybersecurity controls so that they can become advocates in their own communities. There are many examples of cyber volunteering organizations doing this successfully, such as partnering with the Small Business Council. There's a number of nonprofits whose only job it is to connect different sectors and become their local leaders. And we believe that partnerships with these regional institutions is going to be critical to our long-term success. Grace, you're...
Sorry about that. And that brings us to our final section of the roadmap, which it is umbrellaed under the theme that state governments are being asked to take on more responsibility for cybersecurity than ever before. So to effectively protect community organizations, states need to create an ecosystem of support. We believe that starting up and supporting these local cyber volunteering programs is the best way to do this. The final section of this roadmap features a guidebook that states can go to learn how to create this ecosystem. It's essentially a clearinghouse for actions to take to expand cyber volunteering programs locally and improve resilience of state communities while investing in homegrown talent. It outlines the different kinds of programs that exist, how these programs feed together and build resilience. It also links to modeled laws for states to reference when considering setting up their own state cyber civilian corps, and it outlines the most effective ways to fund initiatives with higher education and how to structure pathways for private sector volunteering.
So this brings us to the conclusion of our very high-level overview of the report. It is 50 pages. We wanted to keep this pretty short, but we really encourage you to read the full report. What we're hoping that you take away from this is a few things. One, that investing at the regional level is really the long-term sustainable solution to solving community cybersecurity, creating these local ecosystems of support where people can work with their trusted allies to protect themselves against cyber attacks in the long run. And that involves folks from universities, nonprofits, state governments, and industry all working together and playing their part. There are things that every single person in this room can do to make this problem better. One, read the roadmap and see where you can best plug into this network. Two, share the state guidebook with your local leaders who are likely under increased pressure to take action on cybersecurity, but may not know where best to invest in this moment. And three, please join us in this initiative to create and expand cyber volunteering across the US. And with that, I'm excited to introduce you to my colleague, Adrienne Auger, from the CyberPeace Institute, who will share with you the first step that we're taking towards expanding these cyber volunteering organizations.
Thank you very much, Sarah, and hi, everyone. At the CyberPeace Institute and the Center for Long-Term Cybersecurity at UC Berkeley, we believe in taking our own medicine. One of the key recommendations from the report Grace and Sarah just presented is to actively strengthen the ecosystem of cyber volunteerism in the US. And today we're proud to put those words into action by launching the first ever platform to map and connect every single cyber volunteer group in the country to the community organizations that need the help most. We're building on the momentum created by CISA's incredible work through the Joint Cyber Defense Collaborative and Cyber Volunteer Resource Center launched in 2024. And the new platform amplifies and supports those efforts by creating a shared space for collaboration, visibility, and connection. And this is just the beginning. We're committed to listening closely, both to organizations seeking support and to those delivering volunteer-based services, so we can keep evolving the platform to serve both groups as effectively as possible. We're excited to launch and even more excited about what comes next. The platform is today publicly accessible at cybervolunteers.us. And now I'm going to let Jessica show you a quick demo. Thank you very much.
Cybersecurity volunteers are stepping up to protect America's most vulnerable organizations. Nonprofits, schools, rural hospitals, and small businesses face relentless cyber threats, but most lack the resources to defend themselves. That's why the Cyber Resilience Corps was created. We connect skilled cybersecurity volunteers with community organizations in need, delivering trusted and free cybersecurity assistance. Building on CISA's Volunteer Resource Center, this growing network fosters collaboration, shared threat intelligence, and new tools for long-term community cyber resilience. Whether you're a cybersecurity expert ready to serve or a community leader looking for help, this is your place to take action. The Cyber Resilience Corps needs you. Join now. Visit cybervolunteers.us to get started.
Great. Well, welcome back. Thank you, Sarah and Grace, for that, and Adrian for that wonderful presentation. I think we're now going to go to a little bit of Q&A on the presentation and the platform. Please submit your questions in the Q&A in the Zoom interface, and we will have our experts answer them. So for the panel, the first questions are a little bit related. Can you talk a little bit about how does somebody become a cybersecurity volunteer? What kind of training is available, and what are the skills that are needed?
Yeah, I can kick this off, and then I think Adrian probably has a bit to add as well. So first off, I'm really glad to hear that folks in this audience are excited to potentially join or encourage their friends and loved ones to join as cyber volunteers. Folks can join cyber volunteering from a lot of different areas of expertise. We have volunteers from everywhere from students in high schools and universities all the way to cyber professionals and retired veterans and other military folks who volunteer in their spare time. There's a lot of ways to get trained, and it very much depends on what program you decide to volunteer with. So if you're interested, you can go to cybervolunteers.us, put in a little bit about yourself, and get matched with the program. And if you click through to their program page, they'll have more information about what types of volunteers they take, what sort of training they have. Some of them might train you themselves, some of them might require certain certifications, but there's a real host of different types of ways to volunteer and get involved.
Nothing to add. That was a perfect answer, Sarah. Thanks.
I see some questions in the chat about what to expect after registering on the platform. So to clarify, when you click through the platform and you are able to respond to, or not respond to, when you're able to identify what volunteering organizations you may be qualified to sign up for, it will direct you to reach out directly to the specific cyber volunteering organization, the program itself, to see about participating. And so each unique volunteering program has its own unique process for onboarding and registering and doing background checks on volunteers. So that's program specific, but that's a little bit more about that. Anyone else have anything to add on the volunteering side? Okay. Awesome.
Grace, maybe to complement what you were just saying and answering the question from Saumil in the chat asking if people register as volunteers or register as groups. You can register to the platform and add the information about a volunteer group that we have not documented already, and you do that as a group. If you want to participate through the CRC as an individual volunteer, then it's what Grace was explaining. You have to find the right group that can welcome you as an expert or student, depending on your qualifications, and then volunteer through them.
Great. Well, the next question I see is a question about the liability situation for volunteers now, and are there frameworks and documents around this?
Yeah, this is a great question. And this is actually one of the biggest gaps that we identified when talking with a lot of the volunteering organizations in the US. Some of them have legal teams or are able to work with legal clinics to provide them liability protection through MOU documents, and others that they can have the organizations that they work with sign to protect those volunteers from liability. But a lot of volunteering organizations struggle with this. And actually, one of the recommendations that we have in the report, if you dig down deep into it, is about producing standardized templates for liability documentation that all volunteering organizations can use to protect their individuals. So that is something that we're going to be working on in the coming months after the report to try and produce that and make it available for everyone.
Great. Well, I think we have time for a few more questions. I do see a question talking about the current funding situation with the state and local and tribal cybersecurity grant program. I think that's something that might get mentioned in the panel that's coming up, but I think it's a good preview. Does this group have thoughts on what alternative funding models could ensure continuity of critical cyber defense services?
Yeah, I'm not sure that we're ever going to be able to replace federal funding at that scale, but what we're advocating for is trying to create safety nets at the local level that will be able to catch folks that fall through the cracks. Ideally, that would work in concert with federal government funding and support and existing services. We've been sad to see those threatened in recent months, and we hope that they continue to include the SLCGP, but also, as we mentioned, support that CISA provides, support that MSISAC and EISAC provide as well. So ideally, they're not opposed to each other, and we believe that the state's strategy can move forwards, and that we're hoping to provide a path for them to start investing. But again, we're never going to be able to reach the scale of federal government funding and that national support.
Great. I'm going to take just a couple more questions, and then I think our experts here can continue to respond to some of the questions offline in the chat as we segue to our panel. But just maybe a question about whether, is this a US-based program? Can someone volunteer remotely from another country? And maybe are there plans to expand this potentially more globally?
Yeah, I'm happy to take this. So depending on the specific cyber volunteering program, you may or may not be able to volunteer. So one example is CyberPeace Builders. They take volunteers from across the globe, and they work primarily with nonprofits. And so depending on the specific volunteering organization, look into the specifics of what you're able to qualify for. But CyberPeace Builders is one that stands out to me as being able to take people that are based internationally. And then to address the second question, which is about potentially expanding globally, we're exploring that option potentially for next steps. But we are starting this initial phase with the US primarily. Sarah, anything to add on that?
No, I think that sounds great. And thankfully, we have another longer Q&A session after our fireside chat. So if you have more questions about the report and our strategy, our next session is going to talk a little bit about what the roadmap looks like in action. It might answer some of your questions, and if not, we'll have a little bit more time to talk in a few minutes.
Great. Well, thank you all. This is incredible work. And we will transition now to our distinguished panel. And I think, as we get started with the panel, one thing that the Cyber Resilience Core roadmap really shines a light on is that community security is national security. And we are obviously having this discussion at an inflection point for community cyber. As one of our guests just asked in the chat, we are seeing a pullback of federal government support to state and local cyber. As discussed, the future of the state and local and tribal cybersecurity grant program is uncertain. We've seen cutback of support and funding to institutions like the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, to the multi-state ISAC. And at the same time, we're seeing increasing activity by nation-state actors on small critical infrastructure, of course, alongside common cybercrime that affects our community organizations and can be existential for a small business. So I'm really pleased to welcome this distinguished panel to talk a little bit about what all of this looks like on the ground. How do you implement community cybersecurity? And in a moment, I'm going to ask each of our distinguished panelists to introduce themselves and they and their organization's role in this. And then secondly, start off the discussion just by saying what excites you most about what you see in the Cyber Resilience Core roadmap and this effort? I'm going to start with Eric Franco. If you could take those two questions, yourself, your organization, your role, and what excites you most.
Sure. Like Sarah mentioned, my name is Eric Franco. I'm with Wisconsin Emergency Management. I work as the project director for the Wisconsin Cyber Response Team, which is an all-volunteer group that responds to cybersecurity incidents within the public sector here in the state. We also provide consultant services, assessment services, preparedness activities such as incident response planning, plan reviewing, tabletop exercises, a whole litany of wraparound services to our public sector entities. That being said, what excites me about the roadmap is it is a document that I think provides quite a bit of coherence for several different levels of jurisdictional connectivity, if you will, so that regardless of whether you're a private sector entity or local business, mom and pop, so to speak, or even a government entity at any level, it does provide an avenue for involvement. And I think as you go through the document, information that leads to some tips for sustainability as well.
Great, thank you, Eric, and welcome. Francesca, up next.
Hi, everyone. I'm Francesca Lockhart. I'm the Cybersecurity Clinic Program Lead at the University of Texas's Strauss Center for International Security and Law. Our cybersecurity clinic program is specifically called the Texas Cybersecurity Clinic. We work with a mix of different clients, nonprofit, business, and public sector throughout the state. And our students work over the course of a full semester to design and implement cybersecurity improvement solutions for these vulnerable client organizations. So from my perspective as the director of a cybersecurity clinic that's university-based, but also one that has a lot of involvement with state and local partners here in Texas, I think there's so much to be excited about in the report, but I'm most thrilled to see some of those recommendations for leveling up existing programs like cyber clinics and others that are represented in the report and on this call, not only by providing some of that connective tissue between programs and organizations so that we can share resources, volunteers, service ideas, and so on, but also, again, providing some of those really important frameworks for continuity of care for the organizations that we're working with. So thinking about things like managing volunteer and program liability all the way to handoff between programs and institutions, so that our client organizations see the long-term impact that we're all hoping for. So again, excited to have been a part of this effort and to see that unity of effort represented in the report.
Thanks so much. Yeah, it's about that connected continuum. And Iranga, I'm going to turn to you next for the same question.
Great. Thanks for having me, Anne and team, and just a great job to the team for putting out such an awesome report. My name is Iranga Kahangama. I'm currently a non-resident fellow with CLTC, helping work on programs like this. And I think I most recently served as the Assistant Secretary for Cyber Infrastructure Risk and Resilience at the Department of Homeland Security. So I think, putting my prior government role hat on, I'm bringing some of the federal perspectives to the extent that I can, I think, to this conversation. And so I look forward to talking a little bit about that. And I think to that end, and related a little bit to what Francesca was mentioning, the part of the report that excited me the most was the conversation about regional growth and exploring regional orientations in order to scale some of these issues. I think it's a really pragmatic and creative approach to thinking about these. I think different people have different perspectives of what regional means. That can mean, literally groupings in certain parts of the country. That can mean entities within a state, right? And then that makes you think a little creatively about the intersection between private companies, public organizations such as higher ed, and other clinics, and then the victims themselves. And I think taking a regional approach that this report does really helps you think about it, because then it opens up other levers, right? Like state level legislatures and regulation and incentives, maybe grant programs and other use of the National Guard and things like that, just other resources that if you're thinking at a regional level may not otherwise come up. So I really appreciated that part of the report and look forward to the conversation. Thanks.
Well, thank you and welcome. Um, Diving deeper into this conversation, then, you all are all expert practitioners on the ground in different aspects. One of the things that this research surfaced was people really want to know how effective cyber volunteering programs are. And also, we don't have a lot of visibility into the kinds of threats that community organizations are facing, the kind of needs that they have, or what their outcomes are after volunteering. So I think there's a huge opportunity to make that better. And I'd love to get all of your perspectives on, what do we need to do as a volunteering community and as a community that's interested in community cybersecurity to get more of that data and visibility. Francesca, I know you've done some work on this. I'll start with you and go around the circle.
Sure. Yes. So I think, again, that impact measure for what works in cybersecurity is something that we've all been chasing, and that's really difficult to quantify because, it's not necessarily the absence of a cyber attack, which is difficult to prove. It's also not necessarily have we checked off everything on this checklist or in this framework, and that means that we're safe, right? So to me, I think when we have thought about, particularly for cyber clinics, but I think cyber volunteering programs more broadly, what kind of impact are we having on the digital resilience of the partner organizations that we're working with? We're really looking at things like, one, what are appropriate cybersecurity goals or the kind of standards that that organization should be aspiring to? And then second, how confident do they feel that our work and working with them allowed them to get closer to or even achieve those goals or standards? And then making that kind of impact survey replicable over time so that we can start to gather some longitudinal data as to how are these organizations doing year over year? Have they experienced any incidents? Have they changed anything about their environment or their cybersecurity protections? Are they in need of additional services? All of these things are, I think, important steps to getting at a common body of evidence around impact for programs, but there's certainly a lot to be done here.
Thank you. Eric, I saw you nodding. What metrics do you think should be prioritized? What do you see that's working?
Well, I think there are a lot of different things to prioritize. Although taking a step back, though, I think one of the things that we've noticed here in Wisconsin with our incident responders is, when they go on site to support, a public sector entity, one of the benefits of their involvement isn't only just, responding to that emergent situation like a ransomware incident or what have you. They have, firsthand exposure to some of the vulnerabilities that were exploited in real time. But then when they go back to their home networks, they have a litany of items for them to double check. And in many cases, what a lot of folks talk about is, their network security controls resembled pretty much what, the victim agency was experiencing. So it provides, I think, when they go back, they have, a greater understanding of what they need to do on their home networks, and that can have an exponential impact, among, our state volunteers. So, incrementally, what we're seeing is as we have more and more folks responding to incidents, they're getting, the firsthand exposure and then the subsequent experience of going back and hardening their networks. What it also provides is evidence for them to go to their local decision makers and to basically make a case for whether it be funding or whether it be additional local resources in the company or what have you, to devote to either hardening or to continuing to increase their visibility of all the things cybersecurity, so to speak. So a lot of, I think a lot of the benefit and a lot of the long-term interventions that we can, implement, is never an end state. It's always a journey that we're seeing. And as threat actors continue to evolve, we have to create a growth mindset among our members and their parent agency, so to speak, to ensure that they don't look at cybersecurity as a means to an end, but rather it's sort of just the way life is at this juncture, in the digital age. So I hope I answered your question.
Definitely. And I think that point about cybersecurity being a continuous journey is a really good one. So Iranga, I want to turn to you and ask, what are the lessons from federal responses that can be adapted for community level resilience in the short and or the long term?
Thanks. I appreciate the question. I think there's a couple of things coming into play, and this is a little bit related to your first question too. In terms of metrics, I think we have to continue to keep our eye on CISA's promulgation of their rule on cyber incident reporting, right? That they have this mandate given to them by Congress for critical infrastructure agency entities to report cyber breaches and cyber incidents to the federal government. And the goal when we were developing it, at least, was, that in due time that would increase the amount of metrics and data that we would have so that we could better understand and identify the threat, right? And I think even with the reduced resources, that should still be the goal. That should still be part of the operating business model where we can run trend analysis and better understand how we are going to be doing a lot of these types of incidents and where we need to target a lot of our resources. And hopefully a lot of that data will reinforce a lot of the work that you all are doing at the clinic and community level. The other lesson learned, I think, is that what we are learning now is I think we will have to view federal support to incidents as through other indirect means, right? I think, we'll have to see what the state and local grant program looks like, what the actual hands-on resources look like. That may wane or that may shift, but I think there will be other ways that local responders and communities need to really think about and absorb the benefits that even a more limited federal government can provide. And that could include, significant threat information. I think you've still seen a steady stream of threat reporting, joint SEAL type of products coming out of CISA, the FBI, the Director of National Intelligence, et cetera. So I think there will still be a robust threat intelligence sharing apparatus that can be leveraged, threat indicators and intel sharing and things like that. And then hopefully there's still some support to these long-term initiatives like Secure by Design, right? Where the role of the federal government will be more evangelizing things that can scale, and that a scaling effort in combating cybersecurity threats will ideally encompass and include some of these most vulnerable communities. And so that if you're using products that are secure by design, there will be a benefit to you having less resources burdened to you to kind of deal with those products that may have vulnerabilities. And so I think there is a role that the federal government will learn, but I think at the same time, state and locals will have to learn to be a little bit more self-reliant or reliant on clinics and things like that, which is why I think your report is so timely. But your nature of your relationship with the federal government for the next few years may shift in a way that is less resource-based and more information and intel-based.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point that I would double click on. There's a handshake between the federal resources and the community resources. You need volunteers on the ground to help organizations perhaps use that threat intelligence. And I think that's something that really comes out of this work, is how complementary it all is when the puzzle pieces fit together. Eric, I'm going to actually turn back to you about the puzzle pieces. I think in Wisconsin, you've actually developed some meaningful connections with other stakeholders like industry, like cyber insurers. So, what effects do you expect those connections to have in the short and long term towards bolstering community cyber resilience?
Well, there's certainly important stakeholders. We can either reach out to try to have them become part of our overall initiative in the state, or we can, continue to work in silos. I think in true emergency management, fashion, our bias is toward whole community preparedness and partnership development. To that end, especially when it came to our cyber insurance companies, there are only a couple that really serve the majority of our county, tribal governments, and their school districts. What we did was what we do with all of our external entities is introduce ourselves, show them a one page of our services, And then they sat back and they waited and listened to the reporting from their customers on how we supported their customers during emergent cybersecurity incidents. In many cases, what it came down to is finding the one person who could be I guess you call them the evangelist for our services. That being said, it's not just the cyber insurance companies. It's the emergency management directors. It's the county executives or administrators. It's the school district superintendents. It's a lot of the key leaders who are recipients of our services who will corroborate, the level of service that we've been providing. And then on top of that, the professionalism that the folks who are involved in our cyber response team bring to the table. I just want to add real quick, what's unique about how we do our cyber response team in this state is we baked into our charter for our incident response leads the positional role as a board of directors. So, unlike a lot of state agencies that have a top-down, type of arrangement, we actually created our cyber response team so that it was this, our volunteer experts, our lead experts in the field who are helping us and helping inform us how to evolve the program. So we're not, imposing as a state agency onto cybersecurity experts what we think they should do. It's the other way around. And I think what's good about that is they see the program develop in their image, so to speak. They see, the training program that we're able to provide reflect a lot of their ideas and the recommendations and their leadership in providing, forensics, instruction or other types of tool-based behind the keyboard instruction, and then practical application and all those things that are related to the actual experts being able to lead. What underlies all that is a vision. And I think, to shore everything up, if the state has a vision and, can get folks to see what that vision is, as with our cyber insurance company partners, they'll be more likely to support it and to be a partner and a stakeholder. It's been our experience in this.
Oh, thank you for that. And that is actually a great segue to my last question as we wrap up the panel will be for Francesca. So folks in the audience, if you have questions, please start putting them in the Q&A for our panelists. But, as Eric's talking about that state ecosystem, Francesca, talk a little bit about the role of educational institutions in that ecosystem. And, I know Texas has some regional security operations centers. How do you see the role of academia as a puzzle piece?
Yeah, absolutely. I think especially in this time where a lot of the responsibility for cybersecurity is being shifted onto state and local entities, which, are not all created equal with the same resources and the ability to rise to that challenge. Texas has a couple of unique aspects to what already existed in the state, as well as steps that the state has taken to, attempt to plug some of these holes in our cybersecurity resilience statewide. So, first I would say from the higher education side, we are really important pieces of the puzzle because we have the next generation of cybersecurity professionals, right here within our grasp. And I think so often colleges and schools, both, 2-year university community colleges and 4-year, maybe don't have a cybersecurity degree program. And so clinics don't seem as feasible to start at colleges or schools. And, I think that cybersecurity is more of a trade than it is an academic discipline. And so I encourage and would like to see other colleges and schools take on clinics and start cybersecurity curriculum building to pipeline students into the cybersecurity industry to expose them to the various career paths that they could have. And so often those positions are available in state and local cyber, agencies and entities. So I think that's kind of part one. And then part two of your question, Anne, kind of relates to like that continuity of care that we were thinking about earlier of where could there be great relationships between state programs and efforts and cyber volunteering programs and efforts to ensure that everybody gets the coverage that they need.
So to that end, Texas has established several regional security operations centers. These are state-funded RSOCs, as we call them, but they're placed at universities, strategically, geographically distributed around the state. And they serve public entities, so particularly those low-resource local entities like school districts, cities, and counties, with some basic managed services, automated services, and then, of course, incident response in the event of a cyber attack. And students are actually primarily staffing these regional security operations centers and working under the direction of cybersecurity professionals. So our clinic actually predated the establishment of the RSOC here at UT Austin, but we see a really promising pipeline in this model wherein students can join the clinic, get that foundational cyber training, deploy those knowledge, skills, and abilities to work with an organization through our clinic service semester, and then further pursue their cybersecurity education, training, and professionalization through working in our university SOC. So I'm hopeful that, again, this model is something that can be validated and replicated, more widely in the future.
Well, thank you all. And to the audience, if you want to hear more about any of these models, please read the report. There is a handbook at the end. And we have time for just a couple of questions for our panelists. We have a good one here about what challenges and successes have you each seen in getting smaller businesses or smaller organizations to care about cybersecurity or to have that demand for your services and for cyber hygiene? And just for the sake of time, I'm going to make this a 30-second lightning round. So starting with you, Eric, how do you get the demand to come?
Pretty much word of mouth. I think a lot of the folks we support, they spread the word and then subsequently reach out to us.
Great, thank you. Iranga, thoughts on this?
We try to put out anecdotal work on, it's better to engage on the front end than the back end, right? If you're engaging with someone after the incident, then you've already engaged too late. And so just that proactive need and how that is a force multiplier in both savings of time and resources is really important. So I think that economic argument is the most compelling.
Great. And Jesse, anything to add?
Yeah, just one quick note, which is finding those trusted partner organizations that can help identify, refer, and kind of source partner organizations for your volunteering group is really helpful. They often know who is receptive to services, who needs them the most, and they can throw, their reputation, relationship, and trust behind impelling some of these organizations to take advantage of our free services. So leverage your partners and those trusted community organizations that work with your target audience.
Wonderful. Well, I'm sorry that we don't have time for more questions. We are hitting the top of the hour, but I'd ask our panelists to type responses into the Q&A if you would. And I want to thank you all again for the work you are doing in the field, for your commitment to community cybersecurity, and for joining us today.
Looks like, hold on one second. My video is disabled by the host. Can Rachel, can you help out? If you're around? Thank you. Amazing. Apologies for that, folks. And to close us off, we wanted to share with you that we're hosting a Cyber Volunteering Day, the first of its kind, in October, on October 23rd, in University of Wisconsin-Madison with the Wisconsin Department of Emergency Management. And we're really excited because this is going to be an interactive, pragmatic convening for boots on the ground cyber defenders all across the country to share best practices and help expand services for community infrastructure. So please join us. If you're interested in joining us, you can register at the QR link to the right on this slide. And there also will be a link to the Eventbrite as well in the chat. Thank you so much. And we look forward to hopefully seeing you there with us in October in Madison, Wisconsin. And I will kick it off to Sarah.
Thanks, Grace. And with that, we're wrapping up our session today right on time. Thank you all so much for joining us. And I have to say a quick thank you to the folks who have made this possible. Everyone at the CyberPeace Institute, Craig Newmark Philanthropies, Okta for Good, and all of our supporters throughout the Cyber Resilience Corps. It truly has been an effort of many dozens of people, of which we are just the messengers. So we're so grateful for all of your collaboration, and we look forward to continuing to engage with you all on this report. Send us your questions. Please get involved. Check out the hub and the report. And thank you for all the work you all do to defend our communities from cyber attacks. We look forward to continuing this work with you all. All right. Thanks very much, everyone.